Alright my friends, welcome back. It's time for another Motorweek Retro Review reaction. Here it is the 1995 Nissan 200SX SER. Now I have kind of a fond place in my heart for this car from back in the day. I've always kind of thought it was borderline handsome and a lot of fun. And so this video just dropped. If you're the kind of person who wants to creep on me and see how far in advance I record these, you can see, because this one just came out, I don't know, a day or two ago, something like that. But I really wanted to have a little trip down memory lane and see, well, is it as good as I remembered in my brain from nearly 30 years ago, if you can believe it. So grab your beverage of choice, sit down in a comfy chair, and let's take a little trip back in time, see if one of these old cars is as good as we remember.
Motorweek is made possible by Lucas Oil and TireRack.com.
One thing you can count on in the new car business is that even when a well-known model name is phased out, it will probably never disappear forever. Case in point, the Nissan 200SX. From 1977 to 1988, Nissan built tens of thousands of rear-drive 200SX coupes and hatchbacks. Well, now they've resurrected that designation on a new front-drive coupe. And fortunately for the performance-minded, Nissan kept another name active and applied it to the hottest 95 200SX. And you spell that S-E-R.
All right, so let's talk about the styling here, what there is of it. So let's face it, I like what Nissan was doing in the 90s. They had that Sentra SER, they had this, they had the NX 1600 and the 2000, which I really kind of like. They were at least a little interesting. They had the 240, but a lot of their styling was really just, I think they took various objects and slightly melted them to see what happened, and then went, well, let's use that contour. Not a beautiful car by a long stretch. They were not breaking any new ground here. But I don't think that was the point, right? They wanted to project dependable, reliable, solid, quality. And I like this car. I really do. This one kind of speaks to me. It's not as squared off and boxy, but it's also not doing anything weird with styling. I just think it's a little handsome without getting overly bubulous. I kind of like it. I really, really do. Now, we'll talk more about the styling here in a minute, but let's face it, we all know that this is essentially a two-door Sentra by another name. But let's see what else they say. We'll talk more about the styling in a minute.
While SER is simply a Nissan product code, it could well stand for Sassy Economical Road Holder. Until the recent model changeover, that badge adorned the coupe Sentra SER, a manic little stealth bomber of an econo box that offered more bang for the buck than a free crate of cluster bombs. But this time around, there is no Sentra coupe per se, although the reborn 200SX is still genetically tied to the Sentra sedan. So the new 200SX SER has a lot to live up to. And fortunately, it looks to be getting off to a very good start.
So let's talk about the styling a little bit more here. As time has gone on, I apparently made this car more handsome in my mind and more distinctive than maybe it really was. For all the world, this looks like a two-door Geo Prism to me, especially from the front. A little underwhelming. I still think it's handsome. Don't get me wrong, I still find it an attractive looking car, something I would certainly consider or have considered owning, but I admit it's a little more generic than I remembered.
While we thought the Sentra sedan to be a bit too generic for today's highly competitive small car segment, the slimmed down lines of the 200SX coupe make for a more eye-catching little car, especially in SER trim, which adds side sill extensions, 15-inch alloy wheels, and a slick-looking rear spoiler to the basic machine.
All right, so the rear end here, I kind of like it. I don't love it, but I kind of like it. I like the treatment here at the D-pillar. The swoop around that quarter window right there, but also the swoop coming off the rear window into the flank, into the haunches of the car. I kind of like it. Again, they managed to not be earth-shattering, not be boxy, but not be bubulous at the same time. I think it's handsome. I'm not trying to overstate it here, right? This is not a beautiful car by any stretch. Nobody's putting this on a plinth in a museum, but I think it's handsome. And I like the spoiler. I gotta say that. I like spoilers like this on cars, certainly back in the day. I did. I think it breaks up what can sometimes be a little bit of a weak line at the trunk. I kind of like this.
And boy, are those performance styling cues backed up with performance hardware. In the engine's case, the same power plant that lit up the Sentra SER. This 2-liter 16-valve dual overhead cam 4 punches out 140 horsepower and 132 pound-feet of torque. It's not new or overly refined, but it's still one of the most lively and potent small car engines available.
See, and I have, interesting they said it that way. I have no problems with this engine. I like this engine. I always thought it was kind of fun, kind of lively, maybe, but not necessarily punchy. Like a lot of Japanese engines, they tended to produce horsepower without necessarily really leaning into torque a lot. But I thought this was a good engine. Interesting they said it wasn't that refined. I never had a problem with it. It was not a Civic engine. It did not have that Singer sewing machine quality to it. But, you know, it was certainly a better attempt than some of the other engines that were coming out by some other manufacturers.
We recommend the quick reaction 5-speed manual transmission, but an optional 4-speed automatic is also available. Winter snows prevented us from doing our routine track test, but we did manage to discreetly discover that the SER will sprint from 0 to 60 in 7.7 seconds, only a fraction or two longer than the original SER, and through the quarter mile in 16 seconds at 88 miles per hour. The Sentra SER's handling prowess came mostly from its superb all-independent suspension. The 200SX takes a different approach. McPherson struts still control the front, but out back, a version of Maxima's multi-link beam suspension. That may seem a step backwards, but not really. A vigorous workout on local roads showed the 200SX to be slightly softer than the old car, but just as entertaining and with even better grip. And well capable of stopping thanks to 4-wheel disc brakes with optional 4-channel ABS.
An interesting little section there. So it's funny because of, I think that must be snow, I guess, on the ground. Anyway, I joke. They couldn't do their track testing, so they discreetly did it. I think that's pretty good, which involved them apparently completely dusting a Ford Fiesta from a stop sign. Good numbers, not earth-shattering, but those are pretty good numbers. Interesting, this is slightly slower, they said, than the Sentra SER, which means it's probably a little bit heavier. But the rear suspension, that's very interesting. I mean, we always want to, more independent suspension moving forward, better. This, they said, you know, it's kind of a step back. It's using the Maximas, a version of the Maximas, and I'm willing to bet that it was less expensive for them, less expensive to manufacture. And if you can get a better ride and better handling at the same time, why not? Very interesting. Very interesting. A nice, solid performer, honestly. Let's keep going. Let's keep going.
Fuel mileage is EPA rated at 24 city and 31 highway. We average 28 miles per gallon. The exterior of the 200SX may be more distinctive, but the well-equipped interior is standard Sentra, with the addition of leather trim on the shift knob and steering wheel. Like the Sentra, dual airbags are now along for the ride, and the rest of the dash is slick and well organized.
So I like this interior. I do. There's a couple things I would change about it, but this was, on the one hand, standard 90s interior, lots and lots of plastic, a big expanse of plastic. I don't like how dour it is. I don't like how dark it is. I do like that they got two-tone seats and they've got that slightly different color insert there on the doors, but then the dash is just a mass of dark plastic. But I think it's handsome. It did do what the Japanese did really well, which was make their dashboards look like all one piece. So it looked solid, and that, well, made it easier to not have squeaks and rattles inside. I hope they spend some more attention on it, because that center console right there, it looks vertical. And so I think if you're driving, you've got to look down like that to see the HVAC and the radio controls. I like it. I think it's a good looking interior. Nothing special. We're talking about economy car here, but I think it's a good looking interior. I really, really do. The one thing that jumps out at me is the length of that gear shift. That screams economy car to me. It screams cheap, and I know they did it that way for a reason, but I just don't like it.
Firm, if short, cloth-covered buckets with manual adjustments provide front seating. Tall side bolsters cradle the driver during aggressive cornering, but the seat padding was too firm for the taste of most of our staff. Rear seats are also firm, but the cabin offers more room than the 200SX's coupe body style would indicate. A 60-40 split folding seat is standard in the SER and opens into an easy access 10.4 cubic foot trunk. Access to a 200SX of your own is by way of a check to the amount of $11,999 for the base car, $14,269 for the middle SE version, and $15,269 for the SER. With only one option, our car came to an honest $15,719, or only about $1,000 more than the Sentra SER we tested 3 years ago. And the 200SX SER carries a long list of safety features, including dual airbags, available ABS brakes, 5-mile-per-hour bumpers, and 1997 level side impact protection. But it's certainly not government safety regs that make the Nissan 200SX SER so appealing. It's the fact that all the driving fun that we've come to expect in a car with the SER badge has survived in Nissan's newest compact coupe. And we spell that terrific.
Interesting. I have got a lot on my mind. I hope I can remember it all here. Yeah, so I think that's an adorable car. Yeah, I'd love to be able to drive one right now. I think they're pretty cool, honestly. I like these cheap little 90s Japanese cars. I don't really know where to start. I think on the one hand, what jumps out at me is that it's not as amazing as I remember. It's not quite as stylish as I remember. It wasn't. I remember it looking like this, right? But I remember it being just a little more stylish, but still not really out there. This just looked a little more boring than I remember. You know, that's okay. And what really jumps out at me here is they said they used the same engine. It was ever so slightly slower, 0 to 60. They had a less complex rear suspension, but the SER was about $1,000 more than the previous Sentra SER. Sure, you get new styling and better safety and maybe a better interior, but it doesn't sound like a huge advancement to me. Be interesting to go back and read some contemporary magazine articles where they really focused on that, thinking that just buy a previous generation SER. Now, granted, that was a boring square box, but it was an exciting boring square box. The other thing that really jumps out at me in all this is two halves of the same thing. The first is that my wife has joked many times that it appears my idea of cars and my idea of the price of cars got stuck somewhere in the 90s. And this is a perfect example. I think I'd rather have a Sentra. I like the 4 doors better, but this car really, certainly if you're younger, and maybe you aren't going for the SER version, this would be a great car for almost anybody. It's got space and it gets okay gas mileage, and it had enough space in the rear. The trunk wasn't very large, but you get the flexibility of those split folding rear seats. Certainly if you're a young person, even moving into being a couple and maybe children, I mean, this kind of car would last you for a long time through a lot of flexibility. I think it would be a great choice. Now, all of that for the base version being $12,000 and this one being just under $16,000, right now that sounds like a screaming deal. I am not going to go do the calculator to determine what $15,000 in 2022 dollars actually is, but it still seems like a pretty good deal to me. And that's the thing that really I get watching this, and I get this watching some of these older videos, is small cars have lost it. You know, the small cars back then, when you think about the Sentra, the Civic, the Corolla, they were getting bigger, they were getting heavier, they were getting nicer, and certainly our modern cars are safer, quieter, more refined, and more technology. The engines are more powerful, while they still get better gas mileage. But they've lost something along the way. They've lost that sense of, I can drive this daily and not feel like I'm poor, but at the same time, where's the liveliness, right? And I really want to focus on the Civic here with this little tirade because I like Hondas. If you've watched my channel before, you know I like Hondas. I've got one sitting in my driveway. We've had several. We had an Odyssey. My wife wants another one for some reason. But Civics have just completely lost the plot. I know they sell well. I know they're still considered probably the best small car, but they've completely lost the plot in what attracts me. The seats are far too hard. I found the last ones very uncomfortable. I couldn't drive for more than about 2 hours in them before literally, you know, my legs hurt. But also they're trying to make them more cockpitish, right? Trying to wrap the dashboard down, raise up that center part, and squeeze it in. So these small cars today are so much bigger than what they were 25 years ago, but they don't feel bigger inside. And this applies to the Corolla too. I don't want to just pick on the Civic, because I think Honda's aiming more for sporty Civic, even if you're getting a more base engine. The Corolla, if I had to go out and just buy a small four-door car right now, I think probably the Corolla would be my number one choice, because I think it does everything well. I think it's just a solid car that you can drive for 10 years. It's not exciting, it's not particularly inexpensive, but I don't like the dash. And the previous generation Sentra was the same way. It's probably a good car, but the dash was just all cut up in cheap materials. And literally the one we drove, my son was looking to buy a car, like pieces of the trim didn't match up. And they all feel a little heavy. And they've lost something that I think really in the 90s, the Japanese kind of honed in on. And for that reason, yes, I like this car. This is a fun trip down memory lane. I'm glad you came and spent some time with me. You know, this is not my dream car from the 90s, but yeah, I'd like to go drive one again. And I bet this would be, you know, certainly if it was new and in good shape, it'd be a great daily driver. You could use it all the time. This doesn't excite me. You know, honestly, for me personally, I would rather have a four-door sedan. I'd rather have a base engine. I'd rather have an automatic. This is not aimed for me, and it wasn't in 1995 either. It was not something really at the top of my list. If I was going to go for a two-door car that was a little sporty, that you had to put up with some of the deficiencies of having just two doors, you know, something like that NX 2000, NX 1600, Saturn SC1, far more of what I would have gotten over this thing right here. But fun trip down memory lane, guys. Let me know what you think below, and if you had one, let me know. I'm curious. Thanks.